Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to a new season of The Cult of You. I'm happy to be back, as well as part of my new and expanded crew and ideas. We'll be bringing you a couple of new, interesting segments over the coming months. But more of that in the future. For now, let's get into today's episode, which is your regular scheduled monthly forecast of the month's up and coming astrological events. I sit back down with the astrologer, Bill Duvendack, to talk about what's coming for us this month and what are the strategies and psychological attitudes and ritual methods that we should utilize to take the most advantage of this time as we grow alongside the universe itself. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode, and remember to live deliciously. Bill, it feels like it's been forever with this retrograde that has just passed. How are you doing?
Well, like you, I survived it. This retrograde was, eventful, thanks to the eclipse and the stationings of Neptune and Jupiter and all the other astrological craziness. So everything was just a riot.
Yeah, I got to tell you, there was one point that I was figuring I need to go double check my brain if it's still operating. Um, it wasn't as collaborative as I've wanted it to be during that period of time, and it was very interesting for me to kind of observe breakdowns in other people's communications in other areas. But my kind of laugh or my inner giggle was, when everyone was secretly celebrating, because you'd see it on all the kind of occult forums and things like that, where people are posting retrograde finally done, now life gets back to normal. I'm like, then we still have Jupiter and Saturn in retrograde as well, so we're not out of the woods yet, but we're just
And
able to
it's
talk
and
about
it's
it now.
funny that you mentioned that because that was a keynote in my blog that I just released on my website, 418ascendant.com, a few days ago for the full moon, was the fact that right now, total, we had like 5 planets retrograde, but I don't see any memes going around on social media about that. The only time I see memes about retrograde planets are when it's Mercury and some of the cute planets that people like, not the real serious movers like the ones that impact society.
It's true, but it also kind of like is testimony to Mercury, I suppose, god of communication. He's got the marketing down, so I'm surprised that
He
we don't
does.
see it the same with Venus more often as well.
Yeah, he
Kind of
does. He's got the commerce down.
yes, yes, exactly. So, but I mean, speaking about that, like before we kind of get into the month and into its stuff. So when we're talking about Mercury, we're talking about Saturn and Jupiter specifically inside of their retrograde. Now, I mean, there's the obvious correlations of that in terms of business, leadership, as well as kind of shadow issues and those components. How does the retrograde in terms of these two planets work and affect? What are the key concepts that we're kind of looking at?
Well, the good news is Jupiter is the greater benefic. So when Jupiter's retrograde, it's the least negative as any other planet. When Jupiter's retrograde in natal chart, it means the individual comes from some kind of split background. I read astrological texts in the late 1800s and early 1900s that said when Jupiter's retrograde in the natal chart, it means the individual came from parents that got divorced, or one of them died when the child was young. It was very, very specific. But now that I've done more charts for people in this more enlightened age, It just means a split background. So when
Okay.
Jupiter's retrograde now, on one hand, it's talking about diversity and variety, exploring different things and seeing what it works. But it's also saying there's the public image, but just because that's the public image does not mean that's the way you have to be behind the scenes.
I see.
So there's that duality present with Jupiter that I think is very interesting, because Jupiter is one of the ruling planets of Pisces, which is a very duality sign.
Okay. Okay.
So Jupiter retrograde doesn't mean too much. On a social level, it means there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So
Mm.
don't take anything at face value from the media, but anybody with reasoning skills already knows that.
Especially in today's day and age.
Hmm.
So, I mean, with that, can that also then kind of indicate almost, if it's a split in terms of background, can it also be a split in terms of like career paths, maybe taking a time of change of direction of something that is, however, since this is not as negative, more in terms of what's going to be a better, more of a reality check of where do you really want to be as well.
Right, right, exactly. You can do that. Another way to look at it is, let's say you got your 9 to 5 day job and you're thinking about starting your own business. Well, then during a Jupiter retrograde is when you go to your 9 to 5 day job, but then you'd start networking with entrepreneurs, or you'd start reading up on to see what the lifestyle is and all the paperwork. You would have no plans on doing it live, but
Okay.
now is when you would do the research to see if it would be viable.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. Now, with that kind of connecting with that Saturn retrograde, is that also, I think it sounds like it's a bit of a revealing of what might be also discovering what are the shadow kind of, internal darker parts of myself that might be preventing me or wanting me to make those changes as well, and
When
being
you
honest
throw,
about that.
yeah, when you throw Saturn into the mix, it paints a pretty colorful picture. When Saturn is retrograde, it's a great time to reassess how you do things, to see if there are new and better ways available.
Oh,
When
okay.
Saturn's retrograde in the natal chart, it means the individual has a tendency to use outdated methods and techniques in the affairs of that house because it's their comfort zone.
Interesting.
So then in the transiting sky, it's a great time to review what we're doing and why we're doing it. Now, the hidden esoteric wisdom there is that it implies there's better ways available.
This is so I'm so resonant with this. I'm actually recently completing a rather large project, and I'm also actively in transition between different business partners and kind of path lines as I'm expanding my business, and that's been a very big theme for me. I've been, especially these last 2 days, realizing and actively seeing ways that I can improve my productivity, improve my business release pattern by just applying new methods, things that are actually reducing, if I'm going to put an 80-20 kind of angle to it, that focusing on that 20% and actually increasing my productivity by 80% by letting go of outdated methods, and always also kind of asking like, why am I attached to it? What was the thing that kept one going? What are those limiting beliefs? Because that's a big thing for our society. We want to live our dream. We want to live these things that we want to go to for many people. And it's also, I think there's a beautiful kind of correlation. There's the Jupiter element going, saying, let's be realistic about where we're at. But then there's also the Saturn element and go, sure, we need to be honest and frank about where we're going, but what is the, shall we say, what is the kind of limiting factor? Maybe there's a deeper, old pattern or an old way of thinking that's kind of keeping us in that old way of life that we now need to let go of.
Yeah, and to give a really practical example, when I started my astrology business, Saturn was retrograde. So when I started my business, I knew going into it, I would have to constantly be aware of this.
Okay.
But I also knew the wisdom lies in the acceptance and the application. So when I was doing my financial books, I was doing it old school, pencil and ledgers
Oh, yes.
for everything that I did, line by line item. And I did that because I'm a math atheist. It's a fucking religion. You take any two things, you put them together, you get something unlike the other. Who the hell knows how it happened? The same as spirituality. So fast forward 3 or 4 years till my business gets to the point where I'm spending more time bookkeeping than actual business.
No doubt.
And my thought was, Saturn retrograde in play. So I switched to QuickBooks.
That's such a great reference, because it's one of those unconscious things that I think we're all victim to in many ways. We keep playing these methods, these modes, and sure, it may be efficient in that initial part. You're like, I know this way, and it's easy to find that kind of load of most predictable method of success, or accomplishing the thing. But unless you're going to be honest and saying, like, is this really in alignment? Are we getting the reality check to my bigger vision? Which is again where that Jupiter is, that Lord, that God of gods kind of a thing. What's the big game plan? Is it still efficient? So this is not a bad time then. This is very much probably one of the most productive if we're honestly applying these energies, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is the season. I don't know about where you are, but this is the season where a lot of people like to go out in the sun. They take their holidays, they take their vacations, they do stuff with the family, and that's fine. But you're sacrificing what we're discussing here.
Mm, mm,
I would rather take those vacations and holidays when the stars say it's acceptable to do it,
mm.
not a set time every year because the sky is so fluid.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
say that because that's an example of Saturn retrograde. Everybody takes their vacation in this certain time of the year. Well, why is that? Well, X, Y, and Z reasons. Well, okay, what happens if you all of a sudden change that pattern? How's it going to impact your life?
That's a
It's
double
like
up.
your life is a snow globe, and
Yes.
people forget that. Your life, you are in the snow globe of your life. So if you don't shake it up from time to time, it's going to be shaken up for you.
Hmm. I think you kind of like hit something that's really, really gold there. Um, because you pointed out the Saturn retrograde is very much that habit, that old, outdated habit, that needs to be honestly rechecked. And that's a pro and a con, right, for us. Because one, it is, and by the way, I'm obviously on this side, we're in winter, so we try to go out in the sun simply because the house is freezing. So,
Okay, fair enough.
but I mean, that's about as far as it goes. The idea there is, because you point out the example of the holidays, and everyone's kind of used to taking that holiday at a certain time, and this is a great example of it. And it shows us two very important things. One, I mean, obviously, if you're outside of that pattern, if you're breaking those habits and there's breaking those patterns, firstly, you're going to go on a holiday at a much better price. You're going to have much better experience. You're not going to be so overflowed with tourists and everybody in that area, so your journey is going to be better. But that's the one side, that freedom from the cage. But on the other side, if you're in business and you're trying to find markets, understanding the Saturn retrograde is really understanding the deeply embedded niches of human behavior patterns that are available then to be exploited. Again, like that benefit of the Jupiter around this time being useful to kind of look at these things from the bigger picture point of view, which is quite useful. But that connects nicely with, I think, the kind of astrological energy of this time, because this is what, Leo to Cancer. Where are we going?
Yeah, and you hit on something subtle there. A lot of astrologers have been talking about the square between Uranus and Taurus and Saturn in Aquarius that's been hanging out for a couple of years. But this year it makes three exact interactions that are all challenging. One was earlier this year. One was in the middle of this Mercury retrograde.
Ah.
And then
Huh.
one's at the end of the year. So Uranus is change and rebellion. Taurus is the physical world. Saturn is structure and authority. Aquarius is new ideas. But with the Saturn retrograde, it's reevaluating groups of people and social interactions. So when those two come together, they produce that conflict that we're seeing in society right now between the old guard trying to say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the new guard saying it never worked to begin with. That was a lie that you believed. So a
Hmm.
lot of that friction that we're seeing in society is due to that Saturn Uranus interplay. So during this Saturn retrograde, it's a time to say, okay, we want to move ahead, but our methods are not working. And we can look to society to see that they're not working. So we need to change our strategies. And just like I'm talking on a social level here, you pinpoint it with a business perspective. Now the Jupiter retrograde comes in and says, well, just because your ways aren't working doesn't mean that you should stop them now,
Hmm.
but prepare to change them later. And that's where the rest of the energy that you were hinting at comes in. Mars is in Leo, and it's going to be in Leo until the end of July. Leo is the opposite sign of Saturn. So we're going to have a Mars Saturn opposition, which represents tension, and that's going to trigger that social dynamic that's happening between Saturn and Uranus. So Mars is like the lighting of the fuse. And what this means is the first 2 weeks in July, watch for things to get hot and spicy on the social front. Because either somebody's going to get pissed off and they're going to do something extreme, or these changes are all of a sudden going to start clicking together in the name of progress rather than stagnation. And coupled there with Mars and Leo is the fact that Venus just went into Leo. So you're going to have Venus, which is love and money and creativity, coming along right behind Mars. So you have Mars the warrior saying, this is my cause, I'll die on this hill. And then after they die, Venus comes along and says, oh, what a tragedy. You should have thought it through. It's
Hmm.
kind of like the wife who scolds the husband after he does a here, hold my beer moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
that's what we got to look forward to in July. And that's not even counting the sun in Cancer, which goes into Leo towards the latter part of the month, which means the sun will come along in early August and do similar stuff that Mars does in July.
Sure. Wow.
Right. So basically, the beginning of July through about the end of August, watch for these social changes and these social challenges to just keep firing off like a string of firecrackers.
That's that's gold. I think we've all kind of observed things in the community that's already a testimony, to exactly what you're saying right now. There was one thing that you pointed out quite early in this piece about this conjunct with Uranus, and it's almost as that old kind of the rebel. And one of the things that I think a lot of people have realized throughout the COVID times and everything is everyone always had this reliance on government and the reliance on church and the reliance on something else. And it's come more and more to the point where, and this is something that's been pushing us for a period of time about self reliance, but you can go to a doctor and get advice, but you're still ultimately responsible for your health. You can listen to your government for advice and things, ideas, but you're still responsible for your own life and livelihood. It's still in your place, and that's very much what that spirit of rebellion kind of brings up. And it's almost in a weird way as if the entire universe is encouraging this self-reliance, this ability for us to kind of rebel against outdated modes of operation and really recognize our divinity and our ability to take charge and do something about it. Um, but at the same time, it feels like we're now in this kind of like unique space where there's this one part, this Mars Leo energy that's almost like forcing, wanting to push. But then there's that same kind of Saturn, Jupiter kind of energy trying to like hold the wheel. Like we're, one part's pushing forward, wants to go, the energy is there. The other part's going like, not yet, overthink things like that. And it makes sense when you're describing this tension. And I mean, we can see this tension in the media, we can see it in social groups and activities like that. So now I'm going to ask you that kind of like little juicy question, is just how does someone manage that? What's a strategy that needs to be looked at, spiritually or psychologically? What are maybe some choices or things that they need to consider in this time when approaching this?
Well, and the good news is, as much as people might have been driven crazy by the recent Mercury retrograde, the way out of this is through Mercury.
Okay.
Because for half of July, Mercury is in Gemini, which is a sign that it rules. So communication and adaptability are keynotes for the first few weeks in July. That is getting along very well with Saturn in Aquarius.
Yeah.
So then the moral of the story here, adjust your self-talk. I'm seeing a lot of people play the victim mentality.
Mm.
I'm seeing a lot of people down on themselves, like the trite and pedestrian term baby witches.
Yes.
So nothing could be more self-deprecating than that.
Mm. Agreed.
But I'm also seeing where people are so focused on the external that they're not seeing their internal dialogue and how that manifests as external behavior.
Mm. Mm.
So a lot of this Mercury and Gemini, it's not so much person-to-person communication as it is looking at yourself and saying, what can I do to change me? So it's the serenity prayer. You can't change the fact that your government might not be moving as quickly on things as you want them to, but you can change your approach. I
Yes.
had a lot of fun with this when Trump was president in the US because I saw all kinds of liberal people complaining on social media. I'm fine with that because I agreed with them. But whenever any of them got too far extreme, my response was, well, what political group have you joined to do something about it?
Mm.
What neighborhood are you going door to door signing petitions on? Oh, you're not doing any of those? Then shut the fuck up. You're part of the problem.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's the stuff that the Mercury and Gemini can bring to our attention. We got to change how we look at ourselves internally. We've got to look at, okay, there's too much self-talk in here. There's too much time in the head. What am I going to do physically? And if the answer is nothing, well, then it becomes a test of self-control.
So then in essence, this, when we look at the Gemini dimension of it, it's not a going in opposite directions. It's more of a, what are the two levels of the communication? The communication happening in your head with yourself, as well as the communication of your action body. And that's becoming congruent, very much becoming Mott, so to speak.
Synthesis, congruency, eliminating or changing self-sabotage.
Mm. Yeah,
You know,
that's a
many
golden
years
one.
ago, I got to throw some love out here. Slipknot's album Iowa turned 20 just a few days ago. One of my favorite albums of all time.
Mm.
But their first album before that has a lyric that I use all the time. I may be a bastard, but at least I admit
Yes.
it.
Yes.
That's what a lot of people have to think. They have to think on that level of, well, I don't care if people don't like this. This is a part of me.
Mm.
I'll admit it because I'm not living in denial. Now, obviously, if you're surrounded by people that say that's a toxic thought, we can prove it, then you better have the intelligence to say, okay, well, I need to change that part of me.
Exactly.
Because you're right. Gemini is uniting the higher and the lower. Gemini is uniting the within, the without. But part of Gemini, in order to do that, has to be humility.
Mm. So that's so it's so deep because there's so many dimensions of that because that's it's recognizing also where you're overinflating and also where you're underinflating at the same time, where you're, telling yourself something's more difficult than it actually is because you don't want to necessarily own up to a shadow issue, which at the same time is what Saturn is now kind of encouraging you to do, so to speak. And again, the only way you're going to do this is by having very brutal, honest conversations with yourself. And not just at a psychological level, not just that mental pump up, but if I'm walking out away from my desk and I'm not doing work that I'm supposed to be doing that is aligned to me getting to where I want to go, to I may be pumping myself full of positive information and affirmation of I'm great, I can do this. But if I'm not taking the action, if I'm not sitting down and there's a phrase called assiduity, I'm not just putting my ass down and doing it.
Yep.
um, why am I not practicing that? Why am I not congruent? How do I clear that out? Because this is the time now to own those shadow dimensions, to be realistic about if what I am doing is in alignment with where I need to be going. And the energy is coming in, that Mars energy is kind of coming in to kind of say, look, you need to push into this direction. The force is there and I can use it. I can either use it to implode upon myself and not do anything and make things 1,000 times worse, or I can use this to break that old pattern, that old limiting idea, but be honest about the feedback. What am I really communicating?
Exactly. And part of that is just using intelligence and logic and reason. Let's not forget the fact that Gemini and Aquarius are both air signs. And really, at the essence of what we're talking about is personal values.
Mm,
And that is a characteristic that generally corresponds to Taurus, which is where Uranus is at. And Uranus is considered an air planet.
mm.
So there's a lot of emphasis subtly here on being cerebral.
Yes.
And the reason that's important is because you want to line up your spiritual values with what you live daily, but you also have to pay attention. If I said you're a bastard, that's different than saying you're acting like a bastard.
Correct.
And I have seen a lot of people, especially during this Mercury retrograde, that can't see that difference, but it's a huge difference because one's a personal attack, one is an observation of behavior.
Mm, mm. This is
And we got to do that for ourselves.
this is so key. I mean, a lot of people will go, "Oh yeah, but what does this have to do with magic?" And to me, this is like the epitome or the epicenter of magic. Um,
Right.
I always say that there's a quote that I put out in all my stuff. I say there's two core principles of a magician that you have to have. The first one is that a magician always finds a meaning that empowers themselves regardless of the situation. I need to find a way to get myself to move forward and find fuel in the situation to take it, no matter how bad it is. But the second principle is the recognition that all things are at all times in communication and in relationship, whether locally or non locally, and that the measurement of magic is the result of this communication. So, magic is communication, oftentimes at an unconscious level. So, we don't become magicians, we become aware of ourselves as magicians and those internal rituals that we are running in those processes. And that really is this unconscious communication that we're talking about now. So this is the heart of your magic, in essence.
Exactly. And alchemy ties
Yes.
right into that. Your ability to transmute. You and I just spent 15 minutes talking about all these energetics that are out there, but the key of it all is alchemy. How do you play the hand that you're dealt?
Mm,
You don't have enough cards. How do you get more cards? What do you do? It's self-talk, but it's reflected in the physical actions. And that's where the sun in Cancer comes in, because the sun in Cancer is all about the immediate family, but it's also about traditions and nesting. So right now, a lot of people are going to be looking for those traditions that bring them comfort, because we had such a colorful Mercury retrograde. But then that means, without realizing it, they're going to be falling into the same structures and authorities that they probably speak out against in other areas of their life.
Mm, that's an
And
interesting
the
view.
way out of that is through working with that Jupiter retrograde. I've seen a growing discussion on social media of of the idea that if your family was toxic, then if people say, well, you should still love them even though they're family, no, you don't have to love them just because they're family if they were that horrible. And there's
Exactly.
more and more people starting to wake up to that idea of redefining what a family is. Now,
Mm,
you and I know that really flies in the face of not just convention, but of social structures.
yes. Yes.
And we're not going to see how this plays out for many years yet, but it's worth noting here, because the earlier we start engaging in redefining ideas, the faster we're going to get to that point.
It's true. It is absolutely true, and it's again, it's the Uranus there. You know, it's that spirit of the rebellion that's coming through in that communication. But I think the knowledge of the Promethean flame is that sometimes you got to be picked by the birds. You know, if you're going to rebel and you're going to innovate thought or ideas, there is the possibility of suffering. I mean, there's more obviously to the Promethean myth. There is the release in some versions of the myth at the end of it, but one needs to recognize that evolution of any structure is our willingness to break away from those patterns, those old conditioned methods, but also being willing to take that risk, because sometimes you may have to be the rebel, the one that does it first in order to lead the rebellion, to
Exactly.
lead the revolution, but you've got to be willing to take ownership of it. But it's also at the same time that once you can take ownership of the thing is the only time that you have power over the thing as well. Because I think, a lot of people, they have that approach in their magic, they have that approach in their lives, that the second the thing hits bad, the person that now has gone all left hand path and things go bad, then suddenly they want to run back to Jesus or something like that. Or, it was fine while they were rebelling against the family pattern or the routine or the government, but the second the stress comes too much, then they kind of jump back to that old familiar thing. And again, this is the EO formula, the mourning of Isis, the cutting of Apophis, the slipping away, literally the death of the old current before the resurrection of Osiris can occur. We have to complete that cycle, because if one part of us is still stuck in the past, stuck in the holding on to the old ritual, the old routine, we're still going to suffer it. We're still going to manifest it. It kind of reminds me from that one phrase from the Matrix. You've already made the decision, Neo. You're here to remember why, or understand why you made the decision. Um,
Exactly. And, first, let's not forget basic chemistry. Air
mm,
feeds fire. And this month is a lot of both with a splash of water in there.
ugh,
And then, secondly, I like your parallel to the Prometheus myth. And that is exactly the reason why I will always see the term light worker as a compliment.
yeah.
A lot of people speak out against light workers, but I tell everybody, if you are going to work with the light, you better prepare to burn,
Yes.
because the sunlight that nourishes the seeds is the same thing that will burn you to death. So anybody who's a light worker, they've already either come to that connection in their brain and they're willing to face it, or they're in denial about it,
Yeah.
which means their world will get burned. Then they'll have the wisdom on the back end. So either way, it's a win-win situation.
It's a fact. It's a fact. There's this idea. in common Martinism is the concept of the wet path and the dry path.
Hmm.
And the wet path, for those that don't know, is very much almost like the therapeutical consistent. It's I'm actively working through my shadow issues all the time. I'm slowly doing the magical work and I'm progressing at a nice level. That way, I almost don't notice the big change when it occurs. I'm just kind of like on that other side. Whereas there's the dry path, which is almost like the overt intellectual, not dealing with the shadow issues until one point when the crack happens and it either destroys me completely, or if I survive it, I come out on the other side. The fact
Okay.
of the fact of the matter is the deaths will occur, and I think even the Latin root of the word decision means to cut off from. So unless we are consistently dying proactively, and that's a big thing. Again, like the bigger the light, the bigger the shadow, right? And I think a big thing is that discernment that is necessary in order to distinguish somebody that is preaching light versus someone who has transmuted their darkness, and really unlocked its beauty and its power, versus that have just kind of like hid it further in the closet or made it someone else's problem. These are big things. These are big subjects. And I
They
think,
are, and that's a lot. Well, and that's a lot of July. With the air and fire, it can produce flash fires.
mm,
It will get people motivated. So that's what we can expect from a lot of July is motivation coming through the stars and their interactions.
okay. So heavy month of personal responsibility, looking at yourself, looking at your self talk, making sure it's not just self talk that's in your head, but it's congruent with your actions. And if you're not being congruent in your actions, then having a very sincere look at what are these shadow habits, so to speak, that are in the way, and then beginning that alchemical transmutation around them, in order to kind of capitalize on this energy, and looking at it from the bigger picture, but also to make sure you're not, that flash fire is not one that destroys a partnership or a business relationship due to poor communication.
Exactly. And that ties back into what we've been talking about with adaptability.
Mm.
A lot of people think, well, if I'm going to burn down my life, I burn down everything in it. Well, that's stupid.
Yes. Yes.
That's called a pure pyrrhic victory. You're an emperor of a empire of ashes. It's more intelligent to burn away the things that aren't working or to purify them and leave other areas of your life stable.
Yeah, the matured monster versus the immatured kind of monster, so to speak. And I think
Yeah.
that's a, that speaks to very much to an echo on the left hand path. Um, People unlock these concepts of these darker archetypes, but most of them kind of experience them. I think it was Donald Tyson in an old book of his that referred to these kind of stages of Lilith, and then the lowest stage, it was the succubus and the demoness, but at its highest stage it was something else entirely. And the same is true of, I mean, Lucifer, and with all of these archetypes, that in their purest form they can be almost light and divine realizations, assuming we've done that transformative work within ourselves. But if we're not willing to do that work, then we're getting the ugly part of it. We're getting that lower, because that's ourselves. That's that dimension of our own nature that hasn't been worked through. And that's why people can claim, oh, it's the demon that's messing up my life. Yes, but you are the demon in that
Right.
sense as well.
Exactly. The demon couldn't reside there if you did not have those traits.
Exactly. A king of hell, quote unquote, is not somebody that's the victim of these things. It's one who has mastered those things, that rules over them, has refined them to their highest essence, and is as such no longer the victim of those dramas and of those crimes. So this is the real work that needs to be done if you want to be that quote unquote king of hell or prince of darkness or whatever that flashy title on the New Age website is.
Exactly.
but but this, I think, is a big conversation for something that we can expand quite nicely on. What do we still have left for this month? What else is happening to us?
So towards the end of the month, we've got the sun ingressing into Leo to pick up where Mars left off. We've got Mercury moving into Cancer for a couple of weeks, and then it moves into Leo.
Okay.
And while Mercury's in Cancer, that's the time to communicate with a loving touch. You know, we've been talking about air and fire so far, but when Mercury comes along, it's saying, well, yeah, you might have your adrenaline high because of the fire and air, but you shouldn't use a flaming sword on your significant other. You might get so stuck. It's like the guy that is a trained combat veteran. He goes to war, he does his thing, he's fabulous at it, and he has a hard time adjusting back home because it's peaceful.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
kind of what Mercury's transit through Cancer is going to be, because we're going to have all that fire and air. Are we individually going to be able to step back once that's calmed down and shift our consciousness to tenderness and compassion?
This is a golden point. It's a golden point. I know I obviously I work in technology as my main primary business. And if I go on a coding stretch for a bit, it actually takes me quite a bit of effort to come down to a human level. I'm at a purely intellectual, everything is mathematics, and human feelings almost don't matter at that point. And having to step out of that slowly before I even interact with a significant other or anything like that to really kind of get back into that grounding in order to relate. And I think this is also kind of learning to respect that not everyone has the same communication strategy or the same knowledge or the same position that you have, and practicing that compassion. If we want to, magic to me works because of the principle of oneness, because we are fundamentally in rapport with everyone and everything is the only reason we have a degree of influence over everyone and everything. But we must recognize that that rapport means that we recognize the unity. We're able to put our psychological differences aside and kind of come back to understand and hear the other person, which I think is a message that actually is already starting because of the Gemini aspect. Because where are we doing that with ourselves? We're over intellectually discussing things and we're silencing our own inner child, our own inner voice that's kind of coming up for the communication. So it's really a next stage of that manifestation then. You know, fix the communication with you, look at its congruency and the results you're actually getting, which is the measurement of magic, and now then later on step into now with other people. You know, and this is what to me is the expansion of the circle of influence, really.
Yeah, and we still have for July, Mercury's in Gemini until the 11th. So we've still got almost 2.5 weeks of the strength of that communication to go hand in hand with the adaptability.
Okay.
And then, of course, you know, we've got the typical new moon, the beginning of the month, the full moon on the 23rd. And the full moon on the 23rd is powerful for a number of reasons, because that's right around the time that is the rising of the star Sirius, or Sirius, as some people pronounce it.
Okay.
And of course, that heralded the beginning of the year for ancient Egyptians, and they received a lot of information and application of Sirius from the Dogon tribe,
Yes,
which has records about it going back thousands of years before the Egyptians. So we do have that energy of newness that's coming up at the end of July. And that new moon is going to be powerful because it's going to be close to that.
I've always felt a little different, a little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special, my father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science, absent of art, cannot explain, who instead of religion would have romance. And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe, in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.
Hey family, it's Adam Knox here. Thanks for supporting this podcast and, these ideas. I really appreciate free thinkers, like yourselves, that are willing to challenge conventional norms and think for themselves and take on new challenges and look at new ideas. And as such, I want to say that if you haven't yet, if you are looking at ways to improve your knowledge over the entire field and you're looking at a regular feed of ideas and concepts to keep improving yourself, I'd like to invite you to sign up at the Cult of You. All my teachings and all my ideas are there for only $19 a month, and every month I bring you a completely new section of some of the most cutting ideas, and I'm constantly adding to that. So I'm constantly reviewing and adding more knowledge as I gain them. And you'll see a lot of the interviews and a lot of things that I do extend on some of the subjects that I cover inside of those areas. I do take quite a bit of effort to make sure that the filming is also quite good and to give you not just a demonstration of rituals, but also talk you through the psychology behind them so that you're empowered to do them. And I cover every subject under the sun, from science to art to magic to all the different systems out there, from the Golden Dawn to the Western traditions to the left-hand path traditions. We discuss technology and technomancy. We discuss sex magic and seduction. We discuss so much more, from purely the mental aspects to how do you deal with the darkness when it comes up, as well as how do you take those things into business and into your romantic life, as well as what are the keys to make your magic work, as well as to unlock different degrees of spirituality. So if you haven't yet, please consider signing up at the Cult of You, and you'll be able to send me a mail and message there, and I'll be there to help you personally through mail correspondence and chat you and guide you through the entire process. And if you make it through the first year of the entire cycle and you graduate to the second year of the program, you're able to have direct sessions with myself and some of the members of my temple. And I look forward to helping you, whether you go that route or not. Please keep enjoying these podcasts. Please share them with people that you think they're going to find value in them. Like and subscribe to the show. And please send me your messages to info@thecult-of-you. I would love to hear what are things that are important to you. What are ideas and concepts that this raised? Maybe this inspired you. Maybe this made sense to you. Maybe this opened up something. I'd love to hear that. Please talk to me and please share with me. Write in the comments and give me your ideas and concepts. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, if you're only watching this on the YouTube channel, please head on over to Spotify and do subscribe. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, go check us out on YouTube. But please share these ideas and these concepts, and let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for me. I'm Adam Knox. This is the Cult of You, and remember, live deliciously.